Well, good morning, everybody. You can come with me. You can come hang out with me. Well, it's good to see everybody this morning, whether you are here in the pews or in the online balcony up there. We're glad to see y'all, glad that you're here today. For the last couple of weeks, we have been talking about stewardship, and we're going to keep on talking about stewardship for a few more weeks. And I know that on the surface, stewardship can come across as really nothing more than just a fundraising campaign, but we know better than that, don't we, St. John's? We know better, right? Yes, nod the heads. I see it in your hearts. Don't roll your eyes, Jim Clinton, and I saw that. Stewardship is the truth. Stewardship is the truth that everything we own has been given to us by God. Our money, our homes, our jobs, our bodies, even our very selves. All of this is just a loaner. And as my colleague and friend Bill Trexler said a few weeks ago, there is no U-Haul behind the hearse. It's all a loaner. And we are fortunate that God allows us to borrow these things for a time. Every Christian knows that everything we have is a gift from God. Stewardship is also the truth that we are made in the image of God. I look out over this beautiful congregation today and I see, boom, image of God, boom, image of God, boom, image of God. There's an old midrash tale, an old rabbi story that says that before every single person on this earth, there goes a band of 10,000 angels declaring, "Make way for the image of God." That's you. And if we are made in the image of such a good and giving and generous God, then that means that we each have planted within us a spiritual need to be good and generous and giving people. We are not being who we truly are until we actually give. And then stewardship is also this truth, a truth that I know y'all know. Stewardship is the truth that you and I love this place. We love what happens here. We love what happens through here. We love what happens because of here. And maybe most of all, we just love each other. Right? Let's nod the heads again. I see it in your hearts. And so yes, this time of year, you do receive these handy-dandy little pledge cards in the mail. These little slips of paper, nice, sturdy cardstock that lets you know it means something, you know? We don't send you flimsy paper. This is good paper. These can seem like they're about nothing more than dollars and donations, but we know better than that. Y'all, these pledge cards, your pledge card, is a snapshot of your heart. It's a confession of hope. It is a commitment to joy. This, y'all, this is a building block of love. So in just 2 weeks, and I need to go ahead and make a confession to y'all that I am not the kind of priest who likes to draw out stewardship season. And we can preach on themes of stewardship all year long. But when it comes to these bad boys, I truly believe there should be a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I invite you to turn yours in before the end. So at the end of this month, the end of October, we're going to gather these together, including yours. And as part of the worship service, right in the middle of the service, right in front of God and everybody, we're going to gather them up and gather them together and gather ourselves together and ask God's blessing on them, on us, and on our future. Because don't you see, this is about our life together. It's a spiritual matter, a matter for this whole congregation. You want to be part of this. So the one thing you need to know on a practical level is we are halfway to that day. We are halfway to the end of October. And let's just give some visual aids here. See, I'm folksy. We don't just preach from the pulpit. We get down among the people. By the way, this has nothing to do with the sermon I'm preaching. But do you see what I'm able to do right here? What's wrong with this? There should be people in my way. Invite your friends. I stayed up for the game last night too. I was up late too. Get people to come to church. All right, so We are halfway through the month of October. So if this aisle is the month of October and up there is the blessing of the pledges, in terms of time, we are right here. Y'all sitting up front, you need to look because this is important for you. In terms of the pledges we've received so far, we're about right here. So you got 2 weeks to get your pledge in so that we can ask God's blessing over our intentions. Because look, is it just me, or does it feel like God is doing something wonderful and good and new at St. John's? This is an exciting time. God has brought us together, and I don't just mean me and us, I mean all of us. God has brought us together for a new day. Tallahassee has relied on a strong St. John's all the way since, 1829? Tallahassee needs a strong St. John's to bear witness to this God of love, healing, forgiveness, and grace that you and I have come to know. And this is part of that strength of St. John's. All right, end of stewardship sermon, mini sermon number 1. Here comes mini sermon number 2. You'll see that you get a double header from me on most Sundays during stewardship season. It's free. That's just a free extra sermon. It's like extra innings of baseball. It's just free baseball. All right, so of course, while we know that money is a pivotal part of stewardship, and we are unashamed to talk about that here, we also know that that's only part of stewardship. There are other things that we give of ourselves beyond our treasure. We also give, as the well-worn saying says, of our time and talent in addition to our treasure. So for the last few weeks, we've talked about how our spiritual gifts are part of stewardship as well. And you've heard me asking you, what is your ministry? 2 weeks ago, we talked about serving and about the ministries that involve service. Last week, we talked about caring and how some of us are called to care in a special way for one another. This week, we want to talk about praying. Today, there is a golden thread woven through all of our readings. If you missed it, you weren't paying attention. In the Old Testament, we hear about Jacob caught in an all-night wrestling match with God. He fights and he struggles with the angel until morning, and then he winds up with a new name, a blessing, and a broken hip. And over in Paul's second letter to Timothy, we hear Paul sum it all up for his young friend when he says, Timothy, continue in what you have learned. Be persistent. Do not give up on the gospel. And then finally, in the gospel today, Jesus tells the story of a poor widow who needs justice but would not be heard. So what does she do? She goes and she badgers the judge, shows up at his house, threatens him with a black eye. That's not in the story, but colorful details make a story better. And instead of slapping her with a restraining order, as any normal judge would do at that point, he says, fine. He throws up his hands. He says, whatever, I'll rule in your favor. Just leave me alone. Well, what does all this mean? How does it all hang together? And what especially does it tell us and teach us about our life of prayer? Well, on the surface, it at least means that we are supposed to pray. We are supposed to wrestle with God. We are supposed to be persistent in our prayers. And yet, you and I also know from our life experience that even when we wrestle with God, well, things don't always work out the way that we want them to, do they? No. And sure, we're happy with God when things go our way. The sale on the house finally closes. Our adult child finally gets a job. Our friend finally gets some good news from the doctor for a change. The good news, or the good space at Publix, finally opens up for us. And how rare that is, I have discovered in this town. But when things go wrong, especially when the big things go wrong, and they do, it's easy to fall apart. And we cry out, God, what are you doing? Where are you? What do you want from me? I think a lot of the time people have an expectation that if they could just pray the right way, if they knew the right words, or if they knew how to do it with the right feeling in their heart, or if they could get the right people to pray with them or for them, that everything would just magically work out perfectly all the time. And yet so many of us in this room know exactly what it's like to be like Jacob, caught in a night-long, or sometimes even months-long, or sometimes even years-long wrestling match with God. I'm your new pastor. I've only been here for about 2 months, and yet I've already listened to many of your stories. I've had lots of meetings and drop-ins with folks, people just telling me about your life. And already within 2 months, I've heard the same kind of stories that a pastor hears everywhere that she or he might go. I've heard that in one way or another, all of us are struggling with something. Struggling with life, struggling with family, struggling with addiction or illness or adversity, struggling with God. And people will often ask me, Father Lonnie, why doesn't God listen to my prayers? And it almost surprises me every time it happens, but when someone will tell me their story and tell me about the brokenness in their life, the struggles, and ask me, why doesn't God listen to my prayers? Why are all these things happening to me? Almost without being able to help it, what will often fall out of my mouth are these words. Maybe God has you right where He needs you. And that is the response that they give. But seriously, sometimes when things are hard, when things feel like they're at their breaking point, I wonder if that actually is where God needs us and wants us. Because I don't know about y'all, but for me, it is when I am struggling. It is when I am broken. It is when nothing makes sense. It is during all those times that I realize that I am clueless and not in charge, and that is when God is actually able to do something with me. I would imagine that might be the case for you too, if we're honest. See, it turns out, I believe God really likes broken things, including broken people. I don't mean He delights in breaking people or things. I mean that when you come to Him broken, He has a special place in His heart for you and knows just what to do for you. Because it's when things are broken that God can actually get a word in edgewise. See, this is why Jacob does not receive a blessing without first getting a broken hip. This is why Jesus does not win for us salvation without first being broken on the cross. This is why you and I cannot share communion in this place with one another until the bread gets broken on the altar. It is when things are imperfect, imprecise, impure, that God can actually make something new. But here's the catch. Here is the grace of it all. In reading these lessons like these today, it would be a mistake to believe that we are in this alone or that it's all up to us. Yes, we have to show up. Yes, we have to wrestle. And no, we are not allowed to cower to the side hoping that everything will just work out. We must pray. We must be persistent. We must do our part. We got to show up. But as persistent as we might ever be, the grace for you today is that God is all the more persistent. Do you know who the persistent widow in Jesus' story is? It's not us. It's God. That widow is God, and we are the crabby, cranky, curmudgeonly judge who feels like he's got it all figured out, has his life together, knows the answers to all the things, doesn't want to feel, doesn't want to care, doesn't want to change his ways. We so often can be that judge. And like that widow, God is forever banging his head against the brick wall of our stubbornness, coming to us and coming to us and coming to us because he loves us until, like the judge, we finally break and we say, fine, I'll let you in. With that kind of perseverance on God's part, is it any surprise that the other things we come to rely on, our self-sufficiency, our own sense of confidence, is it any surprise that that might get broken along the way? That's not bad news, y'all. That's good news. I have known a lot of prayerful people in my life, people who have the spiritual gift of prayer. You probably have too. Little old lady prayer warriors who pray ceaselessly for their friends and families and churches. Children who somehow know how to speak to God with total confidence out of their total innocence. I've known convicts who have been reformed and know the power of God's love and the power of grace and prayer. I've known priests and deacons who have seen it all, the good, the bad, the ugly, and they still show up at the altar and pray for God's blessing over you and over this broken world. And do you know what all those people of prayer have in common? Do you know what makes them such good prayers? They all understand the good news for us today, that God is in the broken things. They all understand that the broken bread, the broken hearts, the broken people, the broken Savior, the broken world is where God's grace shines the best. Turns out it is when we are broken, when we finally give in, that our prayers become real and God's blessing finally has a chance to come pouring in. Amen.